This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
All right, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal Cast. This is going to be part one of a two-parter, where we're basically going over kind of a downtime topic that there's an absurd amount of information over. And we kind of went over stratosphere level, caught the important bullet points, and we're going to go over them over the next two episodes. And that is foils. Now, something that's important to notice, obviously, a lot of you listen to us on whatever podcast platforms. If you have a chance, watching these two particular episodes on YouTube is important because we're going to be using a lot of visual aids.
Yes.
As we go through the different eras, we'll show images of packs with foil rates. We'll show comparisons of foils throughout time. And there's going to be a few where we're actually going to show a comparison of what WotC's foiling looks like to what some other companies like Sports Cards, Yu-Gi-Oh, whatever, what their foiling looks like. Just to kind of see how Wizards of the Coast did their own thing with it.
Yep.
So one of the most important things then is, of course, to define what a premium or foil card is. So we'll get started with that.
Yep. So there's actually two definitions here. The idea of a premium card is more about an umbrella term. So a premium card is not only a foil card, it's anything that kind of uses a different template as well. So your full art non-foil cards, anything with a date stamp, so older pre-release cards, things that even came in like the Deckmaster series are premium cards because they're different than the cards that come in a pack, showcase cards, premium cards. Foil is just one of many ways you can create a premium card. And the definition really kind of came about for Urzas Legacy, where WotC, they wanted to spiff up the game a little bit. I think the Pokemon contract was either in the works then or coming down the pipe, and they needed, to meet this demand. So they began testing ways to foil cards, and there's a lot of ways that they tried in the past, and they kind of settled on this multi-level or multi-layer version of foiling that we see throughout history.
And one of the other things, not only with the way foils have evolved, has been how foil allocation has worked.
Yes.
And there's a distinct demarcation point, which we're actually about to go back to in Time Spiral Remastered. And that was, of course, the original Time Spiral foil allocation,
Yes.
which there's pre-Time Spiral, post-Time Spiral.
Yep. So prior to Time Spiral, when you opened a foil in your pack, it actually represented the card in that slot. So if you opened a foil rare, that was your rare. If you opened a foil common, that was one of the 10. Similarly with uncommons, it was one of the 3. Starting with Time Spiral, it always took the spot of the common in the pack. So now you'll still receive that 15 card pack, but you'll be less a common. It allows you to open 4 uncommons or 2 rares, and there's not a lot of kind of information about why that was done. A lot of people kind of point to sealed and limited as a way to like break up the monotony of that format and create a little bit more, randomness, spiciness to that format. But that is the demarcation.
And along with that demarcation, of course, there's been 5 or 6 different foil rarities, which Reptar mentioned. Urzas Legacy, obviously. Back then, your rare took the place of your rare. And that ratio has changed. The display and everything has changed.
Yes.
And this is where the examples come into play here.
Yep. So the earliest era that we went to was right around that original era. We wanted to point out 7th edition specifically, and I've got the back of a 7th edition pack up here. And highlighted, you could see that the odds of opening a premium card is 1 in 100. So a pack is 15 cards, so that's roughly 6.5 packs you would open a foil. And you'll notice that on cards from this era, Thirsty tossed up a white one. I've got Stone Rain here. You can see like how true these colors are and how deep these colors are. And you can see the shooting star down at the bottom here that really helped kind of demarcate these foils. Now, the interesting thing about 7th edition and these foils is that 7th edition wasn't a widely adopted set. It wasn't. So there was not a great print run overall, and that puts additional pressure on 7th edition foils compared to some of the other sets around it, which just have naturally high prices because of the allure of those sets or the era within which they exist, the power of the cards, etc. Urzas Legacy and Urzas Destiny foils are objectively more expensive than the rest because they're effectively the first.
So after 7th, we had a rarity shift at 8th edition, which was one of the many times that Magic was supposed to have died. And that change happened there. So this is point number 2, where we suddenly have a different demarcation of these insertion ratios.
And this one's a little harder to see, but now we're at 1 of 70. And 8th edition was also a major border change. It was, I think, the first border change overall in the game, and we changed away from the original border to something like we see here. This isn't an 8th edition foil, this is a 9th edition foil, but you can see the shooting star is gone, and we are now at something that resembles the modern template. 8th edition and 9th edition effectively the same. And 8th edition was also a white border set, foils being black border, which also makes some of these era foils a little more, core set foils, a little more sought after, because you don't have these heinous white borders floating around inside your deck overall. Now, it was a market decision to remove the shooting star foils, and there was actually a question posed to WotC about that, and conveniently the answer still exists on the WotC site. And so September 8th, 2003, Alex Loft from Australia asks, hey, where do the shooting stars go? And Magic art director at the time, Jerry Cranford, said it was kind of hard to tell with some of the colors on old card faces that the card was foil at first glance, except for the black. They decided to add the shooting star, so this is around the originals, to make the foil shine more. And effectively, with the new foils, it wasn't necessary to add the shooting star because of the border change and the way that the colors in the game have or had lightened overall at the time. And I'll put these up for side by side, and you can see, the Seething Song, red's pretty light overall, and then you look at the Stone Rain and how dark and true this red is, and it becomes a little more evident as you move the card around in your hand. Yeah, it's a foil. A lot of this is attested to white cards in particular, or artifacts from Mirrodin, which is a weird bleached look, and things were a little more difficult to see. And a template change forced this essentially, and now
And then we had another template change, somewhat in terms of framing of text, how text was placed in text boxes.
Yep.
With 10th edition, which saw another shift in foil insertion ratios.
So 10th edition is kind of a standout. It's 1 of 56, so we've dropped by a lot. And we'll see as we move forward, coming out of 10th edition, why this is a little more interesting and unique. But, not a lot going on with this set. Probably one of the largest drops in foiling rate over time. We weren't able to check every set because it's actually very difficult to get these angles on these old packs. Are not a lot of it, these images floating around, but we're not going to see it ratchet back up from 56 to 70 and then drop again. And you could say, 7th edition 1 in 100 to 8th edition, 1 in 78, 22-point drop compared to I guess another 22-point drop, basically the same thing across time. We're just not going to see this drop rate happen again, and foils become a little more prevalent. Financially speaking, they're still about the same multiplier. You're still looking at about 2x regardless of the card.
And then, of course, we have one of the best/worst things Wizards ever did, which was the launch of Modern, circa Return to Ravnica, which was the next shift and was actually one of the last shifts for a while that we saw in foil insertion.
So this pack actually came to us from a Twitter follower, Mr. Lubu Fu. We put out this hit last week looking for this pack, so thank you very much. And you can see that the foil rate here is approximately 1 in 67, and so we come back up from 10th edition over time, and discounting things like Innistrad and the Zendikar, the original Zendikar printing, where things are a little funky in print runs. And we wanted to look at Return to Ravnica because now we're at the modern print run era. everything prior to Return to Ravnica was printed in much less quantity compared to this. So this was kind of one of our big signposts of, okay, we're looking at a modern era of printing. Core sets and other sets prior should follow the same patterns overall. What do things look like in this new updated era of the game? And we're seeing 1 in 67, and that's not bad overall. It feels fine. It keeps prices effectively the same. We're also now in the world where mythics exist. So we're looking at another multiplier for price in regards to mythics compared to rares, but we're also looking at a ratio change in the way that things are foils are allocated into packs. So that math changes a little bit, and now things become a little more difficult for vendors to figure out their pack crack math because foils and mythics, but they found a way.
Yeah, had to get there.
From that era, though, this is from Theros because I couldn't find a Return to Rav foil. This is a buy-a-box foil, so you will see the WotC watermark on it, but you can see everything about this is pretty much the same as the 9th edition foil. Not a lot has changed in time overall. We're still looking at a layered printing style with foil effectively across the entirety of the card, aside from border and text.
And one of the exceptions we had to that was around this time, may the program rest in peace, the Magic Player Reward System, where they would send you foils like this just for playing at your LGS.
Yes.
So this was a unique foiling process in that it was across the entire card, text box included, and you can see the red pop there, and just looked really good, and haven't done anything like that in a while. So that was something else they did at this time.
I forgot about the Magic Player Rewards program. It's been dead for so long.
That was a mistake.
Oh, yeah.
And the next thing we get to is when people do their pack math, and we get to what the actual rate and percentages are for you to get a foil rare, foil mythic, whatever. And this was something that had kind of been disseminated throughout the history of Magic, but at this point you have the wonderful thing known as the internet, where all of this information lives forever immediately. So there's actually a wonderful post that we have the link to.
So before we actually get to percentages and packs, we have War of the Spark. So it took a little while, and I had to mull this one around for a bit to find the newest set with foils before we looked at the update to foils for Core 20, or Core 2020, whatever you want to call it. And we're now in the new template era after Return to Rav. This is where we're looking. And we looked at War of the Spark, because after that we start getting showcase variants and with the booster...
Collector boosters and...
the booster fund, or whatever, the Project Booster Fund was put into effect. And we looked at War of the Spark. Okay, what is the rate on War of the Spark? And we find that War of the Spark is still 1 of 67. So we're looking at, new template overall. We have the foil stamp at the bottom. The foils basically still look the same. And we're effectively in the modern era of foiling, and things kind of float. 1 of 67 in Return to Rav to 1 of 67 War of the Spark. A lower overall percentage chance of opening a foil compared to 10th Ed, but Project Booster Fund actually changed the way things are done. So Project Booster Fund was announced in July of 2019, and part of the update to boosters overall was changing the foil drop rate, and I have the quote highlighted here. Previously, the foil drop rate, in parens, this is counting all foils of all rarities, was 1 in 67, exactly what we saw from Return to Rav to War of the Spark, which results in a 22.5% chance of opening one in any booster, so any rarity, whatever. The new drop rate is now 1 in 45 cards, so it basically ups it to 1 in 3 packs now contains a foil. So now we're looking overall at a larger population of foils opened in every set, effectively starting at Core 20. So from then forward, booster packs is booster packs, and we're now seeing foils across everything. The other change we had somewhere between Return to Rav and War of the Spark was the way that pre-release kits work, and I forget exactly what had happened. And basically anything can now come with a pre-release stamp on it instead of doing the guild kits, etc. And this is more of a point for the next time around, but this does affect foil population overall. It didn't change things the way we expected to, where they became the chase foil because they're harder to find. They just entered the general population of foils overall and increase it overall maybe by 2 to 3%, I'd say.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Unless something is ridiculous in the set and it just becomes cheaper to buy pre-release kits for value compared to regular packs. So
Yeah.
Moving forward to the ratios that you mentioned, this is a post on a board game stack exchange, and it is extremely heady. And so I'm not going to bring it up on screen, but I will link it in the show notes. Effectively, what you're looking at from 2017 to Core 20, where they made this change overall, is that, and these are rough approximations, of foils that you open, 14.28%, or a 1 in 7 chance of your foil being a rare or mythic, 12.15 of it being a rare, 1.7 of it being a mythic rare. So that first number was the combined total. After that, 12.5% of all foils you open will be a rare, 1.7% of all foils you open will be a mythic. So that's from 2017 to Core 20. So it's a brief period in time, but the ratio kind of stands overall. And the math that will be in that post is effectively what vendors have to use, something similar for their pack crack math, because they don't look at, we sold X number of commons or uncommons, sometimes even rares. They look at the pre-orders for mythics, because mythics have the lowest open rate across all types of cards, just in non-foil, and you have to meet that number. Okay, so what's your pack crack math? Until you get to all your mythic orders filled, you keep opening. And this is, like you said, thanks to the internet, a lot easier to do now because you can just look it up, but
and it's there.
Yep, the math.
Something interesting that happened after this, as part of Project Booster Fun and Wizards continually making things as complicated as they possibly can, was they posted an article where they said, all right, we have draft boosters, we have set boosters, theme boosters, here's the details on everything.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually kind of interesting, because this is one of the things that when they started doing set boosters, we see a drastic change in the way that foils work.
Yes. So set boosters are pretty interesting, and there's a lot of imagery in this article, so it's going to be a better open later on. But the way to think about a set booster is not 15 cards, it's 15 slots, and set boosters are effectively grouped together. There are two interesting slots that we care about. Slot 2, the land slot. 15% of the time, the land in this slot will be foil. The slot being a foil does not prevent you getting a second foil in the booster, direct quote. Then there's slot 13, the dedicated foil slot, a slot where you get a foil in every pack. This slot can be any rarity. So they both can be a foil of any rarity, and now we start to see 2 foils per pack, which is an increased rate even from master sets, which we'll touch on. And this has only been since, when does this article go out? July of 2020, so 4 months. We've been under this kind of new paradigm. So we're seeing yet another increase in foil population. The one thing we don't know and don't have a great view on is how many set boosters are bought compared to collector's booster boxes and compared to draft booster boxes. Draft booster boxes being what you knew of before, not Ikoria. Poop.
Oh, this is going to drive me crazy.
Maybe it is Ikoria.
Throne?
No, I don't think Throne had set boosters, but somewhere in there becomes the set boosters.
It was after Ikoria.
Yeah.
I believe,
so
yeah.
We don't quite have those numbers yet available to us. Those are kind of tucked away numbers from vendors and distro. WotC has those numbers. They do with what they need. The open market just kind of absorbs these, but overall, it is again another increase to the foil population. But alongside the draft boosters giving us 2 additional ways to acquire foils, and set and collectors boosters has kind of muddied the waters for foils overall, because now there are also more ways to acquire a foil of a card because there's more variants that are premium.
And this is where things get obviously dicey. But prior to this, there was kind of a warning that some people saw as, obviously the internet is everything is the end of the world. But it was kind of seen as like, oh, well, this is the beginning of the end. It's all coming to a close now because we're getting supplemental sets like Modern Masters, Eternal Masters, whatever master set you want to call it, where now suddenly we have foils in every pack. And this was something that when we were talking about how we wanted to outline these 2 episodes, we weren't entirely sure where to put it. Because this kind of goes in with something we touched on earlier, where you have Innistrad, Shadows over Innistrad, stuff like that, where you have an extra slot.
Yes.
Where you have flip cards. And this also messes up for a few sets where your pack math can be. Because obviously you can get a foil in every pack of Eternal Masters. The question is, do you win the Jace lottery, or do you end up with another, which is the best pack lottery to do at a booth, by the way. When it's open a Comet Storm, get a freebie.
Yeah, I love
that. And you have the flip cards, which also obviously take up a slot. Yep. And the reason that this is, I think, particularly compelling is because it showed, for anyone that was paying attention, a willingness on WotC's part to go there and start tinkering with what we had in terms of foil ratios. Because as much as I harp on WotC for, having their head so far up their ass, they're eating their own tongue, they very rarely do things without looking or researching it a little bit first.
Yep.
May disagree with it, but they obviously tested the waters here with these increased foil ratios.
Yep, and it all rolls up to Project Booster fun. People enjoyed the master sets, and as a thank you for buying a pack because things could be so swingy, but they don't care about the secondary market, have a foil. It makes everything easier to swallow in that regard. You might have opened that Comet Storm at Mythic, but at least you still got a foil in the pack. And yeah, as you mentioned, the supplemental sets overall create a wrinkle to what goes on with the foil math for a lot of those sets. The flip sets in particular, both Innistrads, saw the ability to open 3 possible foils. 3 rares in a pack, 2 of them foil. Because you have your regular rare, you have your foil slot, and then you have your flip slot, which can also be a foil. So things are incredibly odd when you look at the math for that set. Similarly, Magic Origins was a little interesting because there were the 5 flip walkers and no other flip cards in that set. And if you've ever seen a sheet of Magic Origins, it looks messed up. It's just infinite planeswalkers, and I don't know how the allocation for that worked. But then, as you mentioned, we have all the master sets that come out with a foil each, and now we're seeing a unique foiling pattern start with Commander Legends in the etched foils, where you can have the regular set foil of a card and an etched version of the card, further diluting the waters. With the supplemental also comes things like Commander Arsenal and the from the vault sets.
And I think something interesting about seeing these shifts in foils with like commander sets and supplemental products, which again was where they tried this stuff out first before they brought it to, collectors boosters, Project Booster Fund. So I have here an example of 2 foils that are from the same year, both from supplemental products. One was from Commander and one was from Battle Bond. And if you look at the 2 foils, and I'll try to capture it in the light here, the one is, being Battle Bond, significantly brighter in color than is the Commander, which is Estrid, where things seem to be a little bit more muted. And this is something that's interesting because when you talk about how foils shift, and everyone knows how bad Avacyn Restored was, first run. Everyone knows how bad Modern Masters 2 was. These are the type of things that we're starting to see less and less of, like bad foils.
Yep.
and more style changes, like your etched foils, which do complicate things a little bit. But it's interesting to see that these broadcasts are there in the game. You just have to look.
Yep. And, what really comes out of all of this in the last 2 years or so in regards to how we're going to be getting all the versions of a foil are yet to be seen. We have Call Time coming out shortly, and then Time Spiral 2, we know we're getting old border foils in the Time Spiral slot, but we don't know if we're getting collectors, boosters with that. And we don't know what the stylization for a lot of this stuff is going to look like. Will each set get its own unique style, or will there be something that gets carried through? We've already seen the kind of like metal style, quote unquote, for Cal Time, and nothing else for the rest of the sets this year so far. So we don't quite know if we are going to solidify on a unique foil per product or one unique foiling version for all products. And that will kind of influence how people want to move in and out of foils moving forward, and something we will be discussing in the next episode. So this was our review of foil as a whole, because it is very important to understand, especially the ratios for a lot of this stuff, and why certain foils have a different multiplier than you would expect in the case of something like 7th edition.
It's also something that we thought was kind of relevant because based on what's been happening lately with foil prices,
Yep.
Which if you've been listening, you know we've been harping on for a while that some of this stuff was too cheap. We thought it was a little bit timely as well. So
Yeah,
in addition to just being good downtime, it was relevant.
Yep. This request actually came in from one of our patrons, and I didn't grab the name, which is terrible of me. And we decided, we discussed, we're like, this is a great topic, but there's a lot of information here. When do we want to do this? And we kind of pushed it off, and then we realized that, it's going to be a multi-part episode. There's no time better than the present while the reserve list spike is going on. Let's talk about something else that could happen and start informing our listeners. So, thank you for the suggestion in Discord, and next week will actually be the episode you asked for, which is specking on or flipping foils as a whole. We just thought that to be better informed about foils, what they are, what they represent, is the best way to approach it, similar to the reserve list and what it means. There's history here, and if you jump in blindly, there's a very good chance you get burned. So knowledge is power.
It is.
KRS
And we don't want you guys to be powerless.
No. Knowledge reigns supreme. 1. Yeah, KRS 1. All right, so specs.
Yes.
All right, I want to go first this time because I said so.
Go for it.
All right, so this week I'm looking at Cemetery Reaper. This card's like perennially on my radar. It's just because, as you can see on stocks, it just is up, return to Rav, troughs, comes back up, dips, comes back up. But every time it just keeps rising, right? This boat stays afloat. And as I was looking through this card, it's been on my my radar for, I think, like 2 months now, almost 3. Ironically, some of the ancillary cards also started to pop. So Cemetery Reaper is this kind of like ho-hum card. You look at it, it's like a zombie lord with this really like middling activated ability. So it's like, all right, what does this card do? Well, this card does nothing but exist in zombie tribal. Like, that's at the end. It's one of a handful of lords, and that's it. You have very few lords that do, anything in zombies. And because it's a lord, it basically always makes the cut unless your combo zombies with like Rooftop Storm. But the nice part is zombies base black, so you always have the opportunity to run lords. It's always got a home. The data around this is basically that, like, hey, if you're playing zombie tribal, then you're running this card. It is in 70% of all zombie decks, or all decks on rec tagged as zombie tribal, and that's nothing to sneeze at. There are cards that are in more, but hey, this is what we have to work with overall. And you start looking at the top commanders for zombie tribal. You've got Ghoul Caller, Gissa, Scarab God, weird things like Muldrotha, and then you see some of the new interesting things we got in like Tormod and Nevin rule. And you kind of get the idea that really zombies, despite being the number 3 most popular tribe on Rec, just really doesn't get a lot of love over time.
No.
You might get like 2 good cards a year if you're lucky. And that's kind of what's really been keeping this card down as a whole. So as I'm looking through this and I'm watching TCG Player and I'm watching Card Kingdom, and it finally pops in both places, and the delta between both of them was extremely small when I picked it, and it's closing now. The Card Kingdom is still buying 20 some at 350. The market on TCG Player is 340. So there's immediate arbitrage opportunity on this. And then over time, Ghoul-Caller Gissa, one of the top-rated generals for this card, begins to move on Card Kingdom, and Haven Ghoul-Lich, another one of the most popular cards that fits alongside this, also starts to pop. So we're seeing a little love for this card overall. And I think it's just really about vision that's keeping this card down as a whole, because there's nothing wrong or bad with this card when you look at zombies as a tribe. If you're going to turn your zombie sideways, you run max lords. And as I mentioned, yes, there are better lords insofar as they have better activated abilities or triggered abilities, but this still exists in the top 3 or 4 of zombie lords overall. Now, without a recent reprint on this card, which is choice, just M10, M12, and Arch Enemy, we're waiting for the supply of those 2 core sets to be removed from the market at a noticeable pace. And as I mentioned, despite the popularity of zombies as a tribe in EDH, there's little draw to this overall. It's not going to. This tribe isn't getting a lot of light.
No.
And then, as I mentioned, various other pieces are popping up on CK, right? So what we're kind of seeing now and what we hope for is just continued steady growth, basically unhampered by a reprint. And that'll put us in the black to Byleth probably in about 6 months. If anything were to draw attention to zombies as a whole and put a little pressure on the tribe, that's when we're going to see a shortening of that time frame. And if we see a reprint of this, which I kind of doubt because they've had forever to do this, and in the interim, they've actually printed 2, at least, zombie lords. One in Shadows over Innistrad in Diagraph Colossus, Lord of the Accursed in Amonkhet, and they reprinted Death Baron. So I doubt we're going to get Cemetery Reaper again. They're either going to riff or make something new. So we either get new eyes on this, so that be it new cards or new content to put pressure on this. I think there's a 6-month window, and then eventually this card just disappears and goes, because this is like I said, the number 3 tribe on Rec. It's behind like dragons and elves.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it's not a lord that they've been in on. So even if you do get, something like you said, you're not going to get this. You're going to get something else, Death Baron again, which Death Baron kind of needed a reprint, and people were all about it because the price was there. Mm-hmm. This is not something that has that massive need for a reprint, so it can just go up periodically as more eyes get on it, and then dip down a little bit.
Yep.
But like you said, it's always going to float.
Exactly. And take a look at the high synergy cards or the most played cards for some of the more aggressive generals, and you'll see this there. Like I said, the only time this doesn't exist in any of the zombie tribal decks is when you're comboing off with Rooftop Storm, because then you're not turning sideways, so you don't need that intrinsic lord value. You don't need to worry about the tribe and your power toughness. You're just going to churn through your deck until you hit some Eldrazi's and then just blap somebody out, or combo with Tormod, Lord of the Accursed. This card should not be 3, it should be 5+, especially with 70% representation across the entirety of the tribe. So that's my pick. I'm happy to be holding a couple from like M10 and M12 because it was a player in Standard, and I'd be happy to pick up some more.
So my pick, keeping on the theme of not just this episode, but my last 2 picks, foil Brink of Madness from Urzas Legacy. Now, when I picked this earlier in the week, there were 17 foil light played near mint listings under Urzas Legacy. This is, I will be full disclosure, this card is not good. This is the worst of this entire cycle. I felt, though, that based on what we were seeing, it was inevitable that the foil would rise in price. And sure enough, We went from 27 of those listings now to 12. Sorry, it was not 17, it was 27, down to 12. The interesting thing about this is that at the time I picked it, TCG low was $5. It's now $9.08 plus shipping. So we're getting to about the $10 range. So in the last week, this card has doubled up. Now, the thing that makes this very, very interesting is when you look at market prices on Urzas Legacy foils. So we'll take a prior pick, one I used as an example here in this episode, Planar Collapse. Planar Collapse foil market is currently $16. The low, which is a 389 sale seller, is currently $25. So in 2 weeks, we've seen nearly a 70% growth from when it was around 15 when I picked it. This is happening all across Urzas Legacy and Urzas Destiny. And I firmly believe that this is something that is going to trickle forward through the history of Magic.
Yep.
It's just going to.
I think this is actually going to parallel the reserve list growth that's now moving into Ice Age. People believed Ice Age was kind of this weird, untenable set in regards to reserve list specking. But so all those cards were low-hanging fruit, right?
Yeah. And, we saw the meme splashes with like glacial crevasses, years ago during the first reserve list boom, and everyone laughed, oh, this card's not $2.
We're seeing
but now we actually...
Skeletal ship or whatever it is, just insane.
Yeah. It's just things that, seem outlandish or improbable. So Brink was something I picked and has since dried up. I think that if you can get them at an LGS, if you can get them out of trade binders, because this is one of those things that's just really quickly moving and people aren't necessarily paying attention to. So, people sit on old border foils that they may or may not use in their EDH deck, and they're like, oh, I've got this shirt. They forget about it. So they don't necessarily know what they have. And not that you should take advantage of that, but them not knowing it does mean they don't really need it. So they're probably way less attached to it than someone who is on top of all this stuff from a collector's perspective.
Absolutely.
Especially now, at about the $5 to $10 range, I still think you have room for growth based on what we've seen with other cards. On non-reserve list. Reserve list foils from this era, I picked reserve list foils sub $100 months ago and used Multani as an example. But on the non-reserve list stuff, we're seeing such a prevalence now of middle school, of what's the other one? Not middle school. Doesn't use the stack.
Oh.
Why? Soft middle school. Yeah, pre-modern, that one. God, why could I not remember that? You're seeing these formats start to explode. So these old border foils are starting to pick up as the communities are driving these formats more and more, since we have to play over webcams similar to EDH, and you have financiers moving in as well. So the non-reserve list stuff, I think, actually has a decent amount of play here. I think it might be about 6 to 9 months before we see it, but I very easily think you could see a buy list on Brink of Madness hitting $10 to $15 in that time period. So if you can get in at all for sub $10 and make your 20%, I just think it's a really solid thing to go for. That's my pick.
Yep. I agree. Brink is a terrible card. I was reading it and glowered.
So bad.
Yeah.
It's so bad.
It's a good signpost.
Yeah.
For exactly what you mentioned, which is we're seeing old border foils, the shooting star foils disappear, and we'll see it move forward for non-tournament staples. Tournament staples and reserve list, they're a different boat overall because they have demand elsewhere for other reasons. So this is the low-hanging fruit of this era is, low print run cards because we were still, back in the 90s. And our foil ratios, as we went over today, are about 1 in 100 for just a foil card, let alone a rare. So the population for something like this is extremely low, and this represents probably some of the lowest risk, highest reward specking opportunity for a longer term hold overall than a lot of other things you could be doing circa this era. And it's not going to take many to churn a profit in time. but it is something that you will just be able to toss away. Or no, sorry, not toss away. Toss aside.
Yeah, you can throw it in a box, forget about it, and then you'll come back to it and be like, when did this become money?
Yep, exactly.
Without thinking.
Yep, exactly. And ropes effectively are pretty top tier for stuff like this. And at a $10 buy-in for something that will be sought after in time, it seems like an easy pickup overall. So I like the pick. I hope we finish the cycle. I don't know what they are.
Delusions is reserve list, so that's not going anywhere.
That's not the sack one. It's like second chance.
Yeah, second chance.
That's reserve list. But like, what's the green? Is
defense
of the heart? Okay, I thought that was Destiny, not Legacy. So, okay.
Yeah.
Which got reprinted, right?
Yeah, because only the blue one is on the reserve list.
Yeah, but only the green one is useful. I mean, the blue one, like, Hall of Helia's generosity aside.
Yeah.
The green one is the one that sees play because of EDH. Mystery Booster. Okay, it was reprinted in the list.
Yeah.
Or not the list, sorry, Mystery Boosters and a Judge promo.
Yeah.
So.
It's all dumb.
Yeah, defense is a $72 card because it has EDH playability, right? So that to talk about the difference in prices overall.
Yeah.
That's where we are with something that's useful as a foil. So. I think that's going to cover it for this week, everybody. We'll be back next week to actually talk about speccing on foils instead of just giving you a history lesson like we do every now and again.
Yeah.
But for MtG Cabalcast, you can find us there on Twitter, Patreon, YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Audible. I am at Halt. I am Reptar. You are...
at Thirsty Sizzler.
We'll see you next week.